I want to first provide, because people still question sometimes, but what exactly happened? What exactly went on? And before the fateful day of October 16th, things were pretty much okay. Um, Jody had accompanied her father to um, a football game at the local high school. In fact, she had just left within 24, 48 hours of everything starting to kind of go downhill. Um, on October the 15th, Mr. Chatfield seemed to kind of begin to have a mental lapse, a mental break. Um, he placed multiple 911 calls to law enforcement. Um, I believe to the tune of approximately 76 phone calls. And it was very clear that something was going on. He was afraid, he was confused, and oftentimes he just had conversation with dispatch. And I would like to say that for the most part, the dispatcher in King Street did a very good job in dealing with Mr. Chatfield, and they picked up on the signs that he was an elderly citizen who, just needed some help. Jody, as well as her brother, were actually on their way to King Street the morning that this happened. Mr. Chatfield gets up and still not sure exactly where he was going, but he jumped in his car like normal and went for a little ride. During the course of his driving, he did violate some traffic laws, and he ran approximately 2 red lights with law enforcement behind his vehicle, and he pulls up to a third red light and actually stops. And you'll see on the video footage the dash cam that Mr. Chatfield steps out of his vehicle. His hands are up above his head, at which point it appears Lieutenant Scott and Officer Sulcata approach him, and Officer Sulcata attempts to grab Mr. Chatfield by the arm. Mr. Chatfield pulls away and now turns and faces the officer, and his hands are like this, and he's backing up, and he's backing up, and he's backing up, and Lieutenant Scott begins giving directives to tase him, tase him, tase him. Lieutenant Scott being the supervisor on scene. And of course, Officer Sulcata eventually listens and does tase Mr. Chatfield, at which point he falls down and you can actually hear his head hit the pavement. And that is what caused the bleeding on the his bleeding on the brain that he suffered. Okay, he is then assisted, for lack of better words, kind of politely dragged out of the street, and then he was immediately rendered medical aid. These situations don't have to happen. We all understand that law enforcement is needed. They are loved by most of us. When something bad happens, oftentimes who you call on is God and the police. And it's sad that something like this had to happen, particularly to an 86-year-old grandfather, an 86-year-old father. And it's imperative that law enforcement understand that not everyone who doesn't listen, who refuses to follow directives, not every one of them wants to hurt anyone. They don't want to harm you, the officer. They don't want to harm anybody. Sometimes, as in Mr. Chatfield's case, they just need help. They need help. And sometimes law enforcement has to take a step back, analyze the situation. And you've heard and seen in the officer's incident report that Mr. Chatfield was tased, quote unquote, for his own safety. He wasn't posing a risk of harm to the officers or to anyone else. And the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, to which this state belongs, has decided that. Right? And the case is the Armstrong case. And in that case, the court put law enforcement on notice So if you are an officer in the state of South Carolina or in the Fourth Circuit and you did not know, now you know. You can look at this incident and you know. You cannot just tase an individual that doesn't pose a risk of harm to you or to any other people. It is unconstitutional.